This is Gene Krebs.
Hi there. Oh. Whoop. Whoosh.
And we're high on Ohio.
We're going around this great state. We're talking to people who know how things work. And I'm very pleased today to be talking to Senator Capri Cafaro, who I first met several years ago up in Ashtabula County, which is a far distance, let me tell you, from a lot of places. But for some time I had heard that Senator Cafaro was one of the smartest members of the General Assembly. It was my first time to have a long, extended conversation with her at that public meeting, and very impressive. So tell us a little bit, how did you get involved in what it is, what interests you, and how did you fetch up here?
Well, I mean, many of us who end up in public service, I think, find ourselves on different paths to getting here. I come from northeastern Ohio, from communities that have seen some very devastating economic times. And as a very young kid, frankly, I started to see the link between how public policy and how government can help turn communities around. And so that was one of the reasons that I got interested in history, followed current events, and ultimately had hoped that I would have an opportunity to serve my community and my state in one way or another. I'm also very committed specifically to healthcare policy issues.
Right. You actually have some professional expertise in this.
I have spent probably most of my adult life in one form or another working on either healthcare policy, pension and retirement issues, long-term care, and the needs of older adults. And that stems from a very personal experience. While I had some academic and sort of internship, if you will, experiences surrounding healthcare policy in my younger years, it was a personal experience of my grandfather having Alzheimer's that got me fully engaged in making sure that all older adults are able to age with dignity. And I've held that commitment through my tenure here in the Ohio Senate.
Okay, very interesting. What's been the most surprising thing then? Because I will tell you that when I came to I was served time in the House. Sounds like it's prison, doesn't it? I served time. But when I
Well,
served,
it was the House.
yes.
So.
Yeah, okay. But when I fetched up here, I thought this was going to be a great debating, great debating group where we would all read white papers and we'd look at the data and everything here would be very data driven. Unless the Senate runs under a radically different formula than the House did at that time, it's not as much policy driven as what I had hoped for. Do you agree with that? And if so, how do we move our decision making process into a more policy centric? How do you have any ideas?
Well, I would say that as sort of a self-proclaimed policy wonk, I feel that we should always be more engaged in policy, in data, and in weighing facts to make the appropriate decisions to serve the people of the state of Ohio. That certainly, while there are, I think, maybe some exceptions, both as individual members have their own sort of approaches and tastes, and I think there are some issues every now and again that are able to be fully deliberated in the way that maybe you and I would want to see. And a thorough vetting process and really engaging sort of the policy acumen. But for the most part, it has not been nearly as a robust academic debate as I would hope.
I'm sitting down here today with Senator Capri Cafaro, who actually has an actual policy background in health issues. Now, you got to understand, that is an unfortunately rare thing that we don't have enough members of the General Assembly who actually have a degree. I only served, for example, with one PhD economist in my entire time. And we can't expect everybody to know everything about all things. But right now, you are up to your earlobes in Medicaid reform. Senator Burke has introduced Senate Bill 206. You've been very active in that. And one of the things that I've been hearing through the grapevine around here is that you're very, very active in this payment reform. Can you tell a little bit about
Absolutely.
and why do you think that you have so many? It's such a target-rich environment. Why payment reform?
Well, you have to target the things that I think are going to be the most meaningful and have the most impact in the long run. I actually am the dual sponsor with Senator Burke of Senate Bill 206.
Okay.
So he and I just recently testified in the House,
Okay.
the bill that is aiming to basically improve health outcomes for Medicaid beneficiaries while slowing the growth of Medicaid spending. It went through the Senate, is now in the House. And I bring this up because the number one question that is asked is, how are you going to slow the growth of Medicaid spending without kicking people out of the system, without making draconian cuts, without scaling back services? And the answer is payment reform. Payment reform is the way that we will be able to achieve goals that are going to be both fiscally responsible and serving the need of those who are in greatest need in the state of Ohio.
I will tell you that I've read recently where the states of South Carolina and the state of Washington, who the only thing they share in common is a coastline on an ocean, have both been taking a very active discussion on this very topic. And so apparently this is the next and most coming wave. I'm also thinking back to former U.S. Senator, former Ohio Governor George Victor Voinovich always called Medicaid the Pac-Man that will eat Ohio. If we don't do some of the reforms that you've been advocating, when does Ohio get eaten by the Pac-Man that's Medicaid, do you think?
Well, let me back up and say that I think that it's important for folks to understand what is payment reform, what is payment innovation.
Yes.
That is something that essentially is aimed at aligning desired outcomes and paying for those desired outcomes. Right now, while we have, in the state of Ohio, we have slowly but surely converted over in most instances, not all, but most instances, from a fee-for-service system to managed care system. There are some notable exceptions, like skilled nursing facilities that are not managed care. They are still fee-for-service. But what we are seeing now is, I think, a trend both in public payers as well as private insurance companies to go away from fee-for-service and basically convert their reimbursement formula towards a more episodic-based, comprehensive care payment. So you're not incentivizing test after test after test, because that's how you're getting paid. You are getting paid on a capitated rate that is comprehensive and that it is geared towards improving the health outcomes, shifting towards care coordination and care teams, having professionals, work at the top of their scope of practice. All of these things combined, improve those health outcomes, help slow costs, but providers are not going to do the kind of things that are necessary to innovate care delivery if the payment is not there for that.
Right. So, in other words, if we don't do this, we're in for some deep trouble long term. And in doing so, we can avoid the Pac-Man. We can give people the services they need at a reasonable cost that taxpayers be more willing to support. Very good.
That is certainly the hope.
We're asking everybody as we go through one of these broad questions. There is no right answer to this, but it's myth busting. Tell us something that everybody out there thinks is true, is not true, and do you have any sort of a data to maybe back that up?
I would say that there are a lot of people, and this goes for any level of elected official, that assume that we all live this very glamorous life and have drivers and go to all kinds of cocktail parties. Which I guess there are here lots of cocktail parties here in Columbus, but we do not have an expense account.
Right.
There
is no gym.
We drive ourselves.
Right.
If you do this job right,
Yes.
let me put it that way. If you do this job with the appropriate mission, you're doing a lot of very grueling, very unglamorous time behind the wheel.
Yes.
In the communities, getting your hands dirty and your shoes muddy. None of which you see in these sort of media-driven interpretation of
Right.
what it means to be in public office.
Yeah. Trust me, I will agree. I okay, how many evenings or lunches do you spend with having a Subway sandwich at your
Exactly.
desk? You know,
If I'm lucky, if that.
yeah. You know, I somewhat wonder sometimes if the main role of a page isn't to go ahead and fetch food for members because they can't leave their office because, and once again, I think it
I
goes.
feel very guilty about that, though.
Yes, I understand. I always used to buy them donuts, but that's another story. But the thing that I keep coming back to on what your comment is about is that if you do this job right, you read till your eyes bleed,
Yep.
okay? You drive until, I mean, you're basically putting on 2 to 3 sets of tires on your car.
Absolutely. I have
And-
50,000 miles on my car, and it's a year old.
Yeah, and a lot of it's going to non-glamorous things like, you know, a community meeting at in a small rural township, church basement dinners, all that stuff, which is very important to get out there and be with the people and find out what's on their mind. I would like to have that somehow, and I've tried talking to the media about some of this stuff, but it just doesn't seem to go anywhere. In the case of our guest today, Senator Capri Cafaro, someone who actually has some hard proposals, written out proposals to go ahead and make things work better. And so you know how things work. You read, you study, you're widely viewed as one of the smartest members of the General Assembly. And to hear that from both the R's and the D's.
That means a lot.
But and I guess part of the problem is that if ignorance is bliss, I just want to die happy. But if you know how things work, you start understanding some more of these macro trends. You start getting very worried. And so the reason I want to ask people who know how things work, you know a lot how things work, so what keeps you up at night? What is it that you find most alarming and difficult to solve about our state?
You know, I think what keeps me up at night is the constituents that I can't help.
Okay.
Every now and again, I mean, and I do try to speak to every constituent that calls or writes or emails in a unique, not on a petition or something like that, but a unique contact. I do try to, be in touch with everyone that contacts our office because I do have that background in social services and healthcare policy issues. And every now and again, you find the limits of the law, you find the limits of the system, and you find that those limits are directly hurting individuals. And so for me, I think that's the toughest.
Okay. Also, there's one other thing that you have that's very, very unique. And I go into members' office, been going into members' offices now for almost a quarter century. Everybody has up the usual stuff on the walls of plaques, and everybody has and you'll see it in everybody's office, has some knife from some veteran association. But you have up some very interesting photographs that you have taken that I was immediately drawn to because they show a fair amount of artistic composition, but they also show, I think, a fair amount of empathy for the people and the places in those photographs. Can you talk a little bit about your hobby of that? I've never seen that in anybody else's.
And I appreciate the fact not a lot of people notice them because they're not necessarily totally prominent, just given the limit of wall space.
They're in the nook in your office.
Well, the wall space is limited, but I do have two hobbies in life outside of loving and listening to music. One is baking pies, and the other is taking photographs, and particularly taking photographs that try to capture, I guess, vignettes of real American life.
Yeah.
In the instance of the photos that are in my office, one is of a strike, of a lockout that occurred at one of the manufacturing facilities in Trumbull County, and the other is actually from the Amish community, which is on the border of Trumbull, Geauga, and Ashtabula counties. In a place called Mesopotamia Township.
Okay.
I have a significant rural community in my district. In addition to what I think folks traditionally think about Northeastern Ohio, they think about the places like General Motor Lordstown, which is certainly someplace that I represent, the manufacturing facilities that are so much of the landscape of who we are as Ohioans. But we have a lot of rural poverty in our areas, and that is something that I hope to capture as well.
Yeah. You know, and you touched upon something that Center for Community Solutions has been really struggling with too, is it is such an incredibly diverse state. And you know, it's an interesting dynamic tension. Members are elected to office because they are homies. You understand your community. You have often deep roots there. And then you're asked to come here where now you're going to not just vote on behalf of your community, but also for the betterment of the whole state.
Sure.
And that's a very difficult thing, I think, for some members to also get. But you've been referring here to a lot of the diversity issues and everything, and this has been a struggle for us to figure out how to go ahead and talk about.
And I can understand that. I mean, I think I'm very fortunate that I have what I refer to as a microcosm of Ohio in my district. I have urban, suburban, and rural communities, and so while facing the challenges of successfully and effectively representing all of the communities that are in my district.
Yes.
That struggle, I think, it mirrors the greater challenge of making appropriate decisions for all 11.5 million Ohioans.
Yeah, and I gotta tell you, you know, I go back to my old district, which was one rural county and the suburb of a mostly urban, somewhat urban county. It was, you know. Your strengths are often your weaknesses, and I can see that about your district. I've been up through there several times, and it's a remarkable microcosm. You're right. Have you read any good books lately? And in your case, have you thought about writing any good books too? Because you have the skill set to write some books too.
Oh gosh.
So
I will say that I probably don't have the patience to write a book.
Okay.
It's not something that I'm considering, at least in the immediate term. But thank you for the compliment. I appreciate that. I barely have time to read books for fun, and I'm right now, believe it or not, I'm one of the many books I guess that is on my iPad that I've been reading more regularly is A People's History of Quebec.
okay.
And
go ahead.
I see a blank look on your face of why.
I've not seen this one reviewed in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times.
I am very interested in communities and cultures that have not necessarily gotten a lot of attention, particularly those that are embedded as minorities, cultural minorities in particular, in larger contexts. We often forget about our neighbors north of the border. I happen to speak French. I'm quite a Francophile in general, and I find that the Quebec culture and spirit very interesting and very unique. And in the context of Canada as a larger whole,
yes.
To find a group of individuals that have struggled and fought so hard to retain their cultural identity, retain their linguistic independence, it's been very interesting. And the People's History of Quebec talks a lot about the political evolution of the Quebec National Party, of Quebec independence, of those referendums over the years, and so it's been just fascinating to learn about, an interesting sort of thing that, takes me away from the traditional things in my repertoire, like the Kaiser Family Foundation's updates and white papers,
the endless Pew reports that we all get all the time. What you're talking about reminds me a little bit. One of the things that we're very reliant upon here is a couple years back, the Bliss Institute of University of Akron came out with a book called The Buckeye Battleground. And it was looking at Ohio from, not in a manner more broadly than what I think you're talking about with your particular reading about Quebec, but how the settlement patterns still influence the political and the cultural aspect of it. I'm one of those who believe that, and somebody just from Tufts just came, God, we are wonks, aren't we? God, listen to us. Oh, this is awful. But,
sorry, Ohio.
Yeah, but somebody from Tufts just came out with another interesting analysis. They've also done a book, and they call it as 11 different cultural, and they include Quebec, and Louisiana.
Yes, well, they are both, they both have roots in the Acadian settlement and the Acadian culture coming over from Europe, and so
Yeah.
they do have a direct link,
Yeah.
as does many of the maritime provinces in Quebec and Maine and some of the northern Atlantic states in the United States as well.
Yeah, okay. Well, this has been Gene Krebs, and been sitting here today talking with Senator Caprica Faro. It's been a delight. It's been just two policy wonks sitting down and just talking about everything under the sun. It's been very, very, very enjoyable. And we look forward to seeing you next week as we continue this dialogue on how Ohio is such a great state and how do we make this state a better state even. Thank you very much.
For more about the Center for Community Solutions or their publications, please visit www.communitysolutions.com.